The Scientific Principles of Wrestling, a biomechanical and strategic analysis of dominance introduction. The physics and physiology of wrestling. Dominance wrestling, in its most elemental form, is a contest of human will and physical prowess. However, to the trained eye, the chaotic flurries of a 6-minute match resolve into a clear and predictable application of scientific principles. It is not merely a battle of brute force, but a dynamic and complex problem of applied physics, biomechanics, and physiology. Victory is not awarded to the strongest or fastest athlete in a vacuum, but to the one who can most effectively manipulate the fundamental variables that govern human movement, balance, and endurance under duress. This report deconstructs the art of wrestling into 8 core scientific principles: mechanical advantage, dominant angle, timing, off-balancing, fatigue, stance and defense, tie-ups, and consistency in practice. Each of these principles represents a critical component in the intricate equation of dominance on the mat. Mechanical advantage allows a technically proficient wrestler to multiply force, rendering an opponent's superior strength irrelevant. The dominant angle provides the geometric superiority necessary to launch high-percentage attacks while neutralizing an opponent's defenses. Off-balancing, or kuzushi, is the essential prerequisite to any successful offensive maneuver, creating a momentary window of structural and neurological vulnerability. Timing is the artful skill of exploiting that window, turning theoretical openings into tangible points. Fatigue is both a physiological state to be managed and a strategic weapon to be wielded, eroding an opponent's physical and technical capabilities over time. A sound, stance, and a layered defensive system form the stable platform from which all actions are launched and against which all attacks are nullified. Tie-ups represent the science of control, the bridge between positioning and execution where dominance is established. Finally, it is through consistency and practice that these disparate principles are forged into a single, seamless, and instinctive system of performance. This analysis will proceed through a systematic examination of each principle, moving from the foundational laws of physics and physiology to their tactical application in elite competition. While each principle is powerful in isolation, this report will demonstrate that it is their synergistic integration, the seamless chain of a stable stance leading to a dominant tie-up, which creates the off-balancing required to establish an angle, exploited with precise timing and mechanical advantage to score, all while managing the physiological economy of fatigue that distinguishes the master practitioner from the novice. The objective is to provide a comprehensive, evidence-based framework for athletes, coaches, and analysts seeking to move beyond the what of wrestling technique and into the deeper scientific. Section 1, Mechanical Advantage, the Science of Force Multiplication. The adage technique over strength is a cornerstone of wrestling philosophy. This is not a platitude, but a direct reference to the physical principle of mechanical advantage, which is the measure of force amplification achieved through the use of a tool or system. 1. In wrestling, the human body itself becomes a complex machine, a system of levers, wedges, and fulcrums that, when used correctly, allows a smaller, weaker athlete to control and overcome a larger, stronger opponent. Understanding this principle moves the study of wrestling from the realm of pure athleticism into the domain of applied physics, where the efficient application of force is the ultimate determinant of success. 1.1. The physics of levers, wedges, and fulcrums in grappling. At its core, mechanical advantage is a trade-off. A system preserves input power by trading increased movement distance for a desired amplification in output force. 1. This concept is most clearly illustrated by the law of the lever, which Archimedes formulated through geometric reasoning. 2. A lever is a rigid bar that pivots around a fixed point, the fulcrum. The mechanical advantage, Mrs. is given by the ratio of the output force, F(b)on, to the input force, F(a)(v)on, which is equal to the ratio of the distances from the fulcrum to the points of force application, MA(F)bb, where AO is the distance from the fulcrum to the input force, and AI is the distance from the fulcrum to the output force. 2. This law demonstrates that if the input force is applied farther from the fulcrum than the output force, AIAB, the input force is amplified. This is the fundamental principle behind using a pry bar to move a heavy object and is directly applicable to grappling. 3. In wrestling and jiu-jitsu, the body's limbs function as levers, the joints act as fulcrums, and the opponent's body is the load to be moved. For a classic example is the armbar, where the attacker's hips serve as the fulcrum against the opponent's elbow joint. By applying force to the opponent's wrist, the end of the lever and the point furthest from the fulcrum, the attacker can generate immense hyperextending force with minimal effort. 5. This exemplifies the force distance trade-off. To achieve this force multiplication, the attacker must move their hips through a larger range of motion than the distance the opponent's elbow is hyperextended. 1. Beyond levers, the concept of the wedge is critical for creating offensive opportunities. A wedge is essentially a moving inclined plane designed to force objects apart. 9. In grappling, a wrestler inserts parts of their body as wedges to create and maintain space, disrupt an opponent's base, and prevent the application of pressure. 5. A knee shield and half guard or a butterfly hook are perfect examples. They create a strong skeletal frame that separates the wrestler from their opponent, providing the space and time needed to transition to a sweep or submission. 5. This act of creating separation is often a necessary precursor to applying a lever. One cannot effectively attack an opponent's arm as a lever if it is held tightly to their body. A wedge, such as an underhook prying the arm away, must first be used to create space and expose the limb, transforming it into an accessible lever. This sequential relationship, wedge to create space, then lever to apply force, forms a foundational element of tactical chain wrestling. 1-2. The human body as a system of levers. Biomechanical efficiency. The human musculoskeletal system is an intricate network of levers, where bones act as the rigid bars, joints as the fulcrums, and muscles provide the input force by pulling on the bones. 4. The efficiency of this system is highly dependent on the angle of application. When a muscle is positioned to pull perpendicularly on a bone, it operates at a mechanical advantage, its most efficient angle for generating force. Conversely, when the angle of pull is mostly parallel to the bone, the muscle is at a mechanical disadvantage, requiring significantly more force to produce the same limb movement. This principle has profound tactical implications. A key objective in hand fighting and tie-ups is not merely to establish a grip, but to manipulate an opponent's limbs into positions of mechanical disadvantage. By forcing an opponent's arm or leg into an angle where their muscles must work inefficiently, a wrestler can compel them to expend significantly more energy to resist or generate force. This strategy initiates the process of fatigue long before a major takedown is even attempted, directly linking the principle of mechanical advantage to the principle of fatigue. It is a form of pre-fatiguing the opponent by exploiting the inherent inefficiencies of their own biomechanics. The concept of limb length introduces a more nuanced layer to this analysis. On a purely biomechanical basis, a shorter forearm has a mechanical advantage in that the same amount of muscular tension will produce a greater force at the hand one-on-one. However, in a dynamic combat sport like wrestling or arm wrestling, this is not the only factor. Longer limbs, despite their leverage disadvantage in raw force production, can offer a significant strategic advantage. A longer arm makes it easier to gain height on an opponent's hand or to control their limb further from their body's core, effectively lengthening the lever arm you are manipulating. 11. This illustrates that achieving mechanical advantage in wrestling is a complex interplay between generating force efficiently with one's own body and strategically manipulating the opponent's body as an external system of 1.3 Application: Maximizing torque in takedowns and control. Ultimately, a successful takedown is an exercise in generating sufficient torque to disrupt and overcome an opponent's stability. Torque, in physics, is the rotational equivalent of force and is calculated as the product of the applied force and the perpendicular distance from the axis of rotation to the point where the force is applied, the lever arm. 13. To maximize torque, a wrestler can either increase the applied force or, far more efficiently, increase the length of the lever arm. This is achieved by controlling the opponent at a point distant from their base of support or center of gravity. Consider the execution of a single leg takedown. Once the leg is secured, the attacker's goal is to finish the move with maximum efficiency. By lifting the opponent's ankle, the end of the lever, while simultaneously using their head and shoulder to drive into the opponent's hip near the fulcrum of their base, the wrestler creates a powerful lever system that generates immense torque. 115. The wrestler's body, in this instance, can be conceptualized as a block and tackle system, an assembly of ropes and pulleys used to lift loads by amplifying force. 1. The coordinated drive of the legs and core, channeled through the upper body, multiplies the force exerted on the opponent's single point of support, making their base untenable. This application of leverage and torque is the scientific reason why a well-executed takedown feels effortless to the attacker and irresistible to the end of the Section 2, the dominant angle, the geometry of offensive superiority. In the complex geometry of a wrestling match, not all positions are created equal. The concept of the dominant angle is a cornerstone of strategy in all combat sports, representing a positional superiority that maximizes offensive potential while minimizing defensive vulnerability. It is the art of moving beyond direct, head-on confrontation, a low percentage engagement against an opponent's strongest defenses, and instead creating a geometric advantage from which attacks are more efficient, more effective, and significantly harder to counter. Understanding and creating dominant angles is the process of transforming a linear struggle into a multi-vector attack, a critical step in elevating from a proficient wrestler to an elite one. 2.1. Defining the dominant angle, moving beyond. Head-on engagement. A dominant angle is a position achieved relative to an opponent where an attacker can deploy their offensive tools, hands, legs, hips, while simultaneously neutralizing the opponent's primary weapons and defensive structures. When two wrestlers face each other, head-on, they are in a state of mutual defensive strength. Both can use their hands, head, and hips to fend off attacks. 7. This head-on engagement is a battle of attrition. The goal of creating a dominant angle is to move offline, positioning one's body to the side of or behind the opponent, thereby bypassing their forward-facing defensive wall. 6. The benefits of achieving this position are manifold. An attack launched from a dominant angle leaves the opponent with fewer resources to defend, as they must turn and reorient their body to address the threat, a process that is inherently slower than the initial attack. 16. This positional advantage makes offensive techniques not only more likely to succeed, but also more energy efficient, as the attacker is working against the opponent's structural instability rather than their direct strength 116. This principle is so crucial that it is considered a prerequisite for reaching the highest levels of any combat sport 116. A common misconception, however, is the conflation of motion with achieving an angle. Circling an opponent in the neutral position is the act of creating motion. This motion is a tool, a setup designed to provoke a reaction or create a momentary opening in the opponent's defense. The angle itself is the superior geometric position that is achieved only after the attacker has successfully penetrated the opponent's first lines of defense, their head and hands, by exploiting that opening tight 19. This distinction reveals a clear causal chain of attack. Motion is used to create an opportunity for penetration, which in turn leads to the establishment of a dominant angle, from which a high percentage finish can be executed. This four-step model, motion penetrated the opponent's first lines of defense, their head and hands, by exploiting and analyzing takedown sequence. 2.2. Creating angles, the role of stance, footwork, and motion. The creation of dominant angles is a dynamic process rooted in fundamental skills, stance, footwork, and the intelligent use of tie-ups. A wrestler's stance is their mobile platform, and constant stance and motion drills are designed to build the muscle memory required to circle, change levels, and react defensively, all while probing for an offensive opening 21. The staggered stance, with one foot forward, is particularly conducive to this process, as the rear leg allows for the quick, explosive forward movement necessary to penetrate an opponent's defense and establish a notion. The creation of dominant angle 24. Tie-ups are another primary tool for manufacturing angles. A dominant tie, such as the Russian 2-on-1, is exceptionally effective because it provides the leverage to physically pull an opponent out of their strong, square defensive posture, forcing them into a compromised position from which an angle is easily accessible. 25. Similarly, setups like fakes and snaps are designed to manipulate the opponent's position and balance. The fake snap create angle. Drill, for example, uses a feint to freeze the opponent, followed by a hard snap to bring their head down. Their natural reaction to posture up creates a moment of vulnerability where their feet are static, allowing the attacker to circle to an angle 27. The power of a dominant angle can also be understood through the lens of physics. When attacking an opponent head-on, an attacker's force vector is met directly by the opponent's equal and opposite defensive force vector 28. This results in a stalemate of strength. By creating an angle, the attacker is fundamentally redirecting their force vector. They are no longer pushing against the opponent's strength, but are instead applying force to a point on the opponent's body that is not structurally aligned to resist it. The attack vector is now perpendicular to the opponent's base of support, targeting their instability rather than their power. This connection between the geometry of the angle and the physics of force vectors explains precisely why this positional advantage is met directly by the opponent's body that is not structurally aligned to a point on the opponent's body that is not structurally aligned to resist it. 2.3. Exploiting angles for takedowns and control. Once an angle has been established following a successful penetration, for instance, securing a single leg or a high crotch takedown, the objective shifts to exploiting this positional advantage to finish the move. The primary method for doing so is to attack in a direction where the opponent's joints are biomechanically weak. The human knee joint, for example, is a hinge joint designed to bend forward and backward, flexion and extension. It has very little lateral stability. 19. By achieving an angle on a leg attack, the wrestler is positioned to drive across the opponent's body or turn the corner, applying force laterally against the knee. This exploits the joint's inherent structural weakness, making the takedown finish significantly easier and requiring less force than a direct. Ultimately, creating and exploiting an angle is about achieving superior hip position. A dominant angle places the attacker's hips in a position from which they can drive forward and across the opponent's hips. 29. This cross-body force vector makes it impossible for the opponent to maintain their base. They are forced to move sideways and, with their base compromised, are easily taken to the mat 29. This principle holds true not only for takedowns, but also for control on the mat. From the top position, driving across an opponent's hips while controlling their upper body is a primary method for breaking them down and turning them for near fall points 29. The angle, therefore, is the geometric key that unlocks biomechanical vulnerabilities. Section 3. Off-balancing kuzushi, the prerequisite to attack before any effective takedown or throw can be executed. The opponent's structural integrity must be compromised. This fundamental concept, central to all grappling arts, is most precisely articulated by the Japanese martial arts term kuzushi. It translates to unbalancing or breaking balance, and represents the indispensable first phase of any successful attack. 30. Attempting to move an opponent who is in a strong, stable stance is an inefficient and exhausting battle of strength against structure. Kuzushi is the art of destroying that structure, of manipulating the opponent's base and center of gravity to create a fleeting moment of vulnerability. It is the scientific principle that animates setups like snapdowns, fakes, and push-pull sequences, transforming them from mere movements into purposeful acts of strength. 3.1. The principle of kuzushi, destroying the opponent's foundation. Kuzushi is the deliberate act of disrupting an opponent's posture, base, and equilibrium, rendering them susceptible to a subsequent technique. 3D. It is about manipulating the opponent's foundation before applying the main force of an attack. 30. While the term originates from Japanese arts like judo and jujutsu, the principle is universal and is employed constantly in wrestling, even if it is described with different terminology such as setups or getting him out of position. 33. An attack launched without first achieving a state of kuzushi forces the attacker to pit their strength directly against the opponent's stable, rooted base. This principle can be applied both physically and mentally. Physical kuzushi is the most direct form, involving actions that compromise an opponent's posture and equilibrium. This is most effectively achieved when the opponent's head is moved out of alignment with their spine and hips, as this directly disrupts their center of gravity. 34. Mental kuzushi, on the other hand, involves disrupting the opponent's focus and decision-making process through the use of feints, misdirection, and deception. 34. By forcing the opponent to react to a perceived threat, the attacker can manipulate their movements and create an opening for the real attack. A deeper understanding of this concept reframes it not as a singular action, but as a state of structural instability. 25. The goal for the wrestler, then, is not simply to perform a snapdown, but to continuously work to put the opponent into a state of kuzushi. This encourages a more fluid and opportunistic style, where the wrestler is constantly feeling for moments of natural imbalance to exploit, handano kuzushi, or actively creating those moments through their own actions, happono kuzushi. This mindset shifts the focus from mechanically executing a set of moves to dynamically solving the problem of an opponent's balance. 3.2. Techniques for generating kuzushi. Snaps, drags, fakes, and pressure wrestlers employ a wide array of techniques to generate kuzushi. The most fundamental of these is the push-pull dynamic. By pushing into an opponent, an attacker can reliably elicit a pushback reaction. This predictable response, a surge of forward momentum from the opponent, can be immediately exploited with techniques like throws, duck unders, or lateral drops that capitalize on that very momentum. 33. Conversely, by pulling an opponent forward, the attacker forces them to take a step to regain their balance. This forward step momentarily unweights their legs and brings them closer, creating the ideal window for a leg attack like a single or double leg takedown. The snap down from a collar tie is one of the most direct and powerful applications of kuzushi in wrestling. A sharp, forceful snap breaks the opponent's posture, driving their head down and, consequently, their hips up, placing them in a structurally weak and vulnerable position. 30. The opponent's inevitable and instinctual reaction is to fight this pressure and posture back up. This moment of upward movement is the critical window of opportunity. Their weight is shifting up and back, making it difficult to sprawl effectively, which is the perfect time to change levels and shoot for a takedown. 30. Feints and misdirection serve as the primary tools for creating mental kuzushi. Faking a shot to the legs, for instance, will cause most opponents to instinctively lower their level and drop their hands to defend. This reaction opens up their head and upper body for attacks like a front headlock or an arm throw. The strategy of show high, go low, or show low, go high is a classic example of using misdirection to manipulate an opponent's defensive posture and create an opening 3-6. The effectiveness of kuzushi lies in its ability to create an opening 3-6. The effectiveness of kuzushi lies in its ability to create a neurological window. When a person is off balance, their brain's primary and overriding priority is to command the body to regain stability and prevent a fall. 34. During this split second of neurological focus on survival, other stimuli, such as the initiation of a takedown, are processed more slowly, if at all. By breaking an opponent's balance, an attacker is not just compromising their physical structure, but also hijacking their brain's processing power, creating a crucial delay between the attack and the defensive response. 3.3. The three-phase attack sequence, kuzushi, tukuri, kake. The classic judo model for executing a throw provides a powerful and universally applicable framework for understanding the structure of any grappling attack. This model breaks the technique down into three distinct but interconnected phases. 1. Kuzushi, the initial breaking of the opponent's balance. 32. Sukuri, the act of fitting in or entering the technique, positioning one's body correctly to execute the move. 33. Take, the final execution or completion of the three-dan. 30. The final execution or completion of the throw or takedown. This sequence is not merely a suggestion, but a description of the necessary components of an efficient technique. Applying this model to wrestling clarifies the true function of setups. A snapdown is not a separate move from a double leg. It is the kuzushi phase of the double leg. The penetration step is the tsukuri phase. The drive to finish is the cake phase. Recognizing this three-part structure reinforces the understanding that the setup, kuzushi, is not an optional prelude to an attack, but an integral and non-negotiable first step. Skipping the kuzushi phase forces the wrestler to attempt the tsukuri and cake phases against a fully balanced and structurally sound opponent, a recipe for failure and wasted energy. Mastering kuzushi is mastering the art of making every attack easier and more inevitable. Section 4. Timing, the art of seizing opportunity. In wrestling, timing is the invisible variable that separates a successful attack from a failed one. It is not a function of the match clock, but rather the precise and strategic application of a technique within the dynamic rhythm of action, reaction, and anticipation. While raw power and speed are valuable assets, it is superior timing that allows a wrestler to amplify the effectiveness of their movements, making their attacks seem both effortless and unstoppable. Elite wrestlers do not simply react to openings. They create them through kuzushi and then exploit them with impeccable timing, capitalizing on the fleeting moments of an opponent's vulnerability. This section will explore the principles of proactive and reactive timing, the exploitation of the action-reaction cycle, and the specific applications that 4.1 Proactive versus reactive timing. Initiating and countering timing in wrestling can be broadly categorized into two modes, proactive and reactive. Proactive timing is offensive in nature. It involves the wrestler dictating the pace and creating opportunities through their own actions. A proactive attack is not a random, hopeful shot into a stable defense. Instead, it is a carefully timed entry that capitalizes on a vulnerability the wrestler has intentionally created. 37. This is achieved by using setups, the various forms of kuzushi discussed previously, to force a predictable reaction from the opponent. The attack is then timed to coincide precisely with that reaction, striking when the opponent is in a compromised position. Reactive timing, conversely, is the art of the counterattack. It involves capitalizing on the mistakes and failed offensive attempts of an opponent. One of the most high-percentage offensive situations in wrestling is to shoot immediately following an opponent's unsuccessful shot. 36. In the moment after their attack has been defended, they are often out of position, overextended, and momentarily vulnerable before they can recover their stance. This requires excellent reaction speed, a quality that must be honed through sport-specific drills that train a wrestler to recognize and respond to these opportunities instantly. 38. While reactive timing is a crucial skill, an over-reliance on it can lead to a passive, defensive style. Elite wrestlers blend both proactive and reactive timing, able to create their own opportunities. 4.2 Timing attacks. Based on opponents' reactions, action-reaction principle. The essence of superior timing lies in the mastery of the action-reaction principle. It is a level of understanding that transcends simply seeing an open leg and shooting. It is the ability to initiate an action with the specific intent of provoking a known, predictable reaction, and then launching the true attack into that reaction before the opponent can recover. 37. This transforms the wrestler from a reactor into a predictor. Several classic examples illustrate this principle. Snapping the head. When a wrestler applies a hard snap down from a collar tie action, the opponent's instinctual response is to fight that pressure and posture back up. Reaction. An elite wrestler anticipates this. The perfect moment to shoot is not when the opponent's head is down, nor after they have fully postured up, but during the moment of transition as they begin to rise. At this instant, their momentum is moving upward and backward, making it biomechanically difficult for them to generate the downward hip pressure required for an effective sprawl. 37. The shot lands in a window of maximum vulnerability. Applying forward pressure. When a wrestler drives forward into an opponent from a tie-up action, the opponent will naturally resist by pushing back to maintain their ground reaction. The instant that forward resistance is felt is the ideal time to disengage from the tie and transition to a move that uses their momentum against them, such as a duck under, an arm drag, or a lateral drop throw. 37. The opponent's own force contributes to their downfall. The steep connection between kuzushi and timing becomes clear. The action, the snap, the push is the tool used to create a state of kuzushi. The timing is the skill of exploiting that state at the precise moment of maximum instability. They are two sides of the same coin, one cannot be effective without the other. This relationship also reveals a hierarchy of skill. A novice reacts to what they see. An intermediate wrestler creates a reaction and then responds to it. An elite wrestler, however, operates on an anticipatory level. They do not wait to visually confirm the opponent's reaction. They feel the initiation of the resistance and launch their attack simultaneously. They are attacking the beginning of the reaction, not the end of it, which is why their timing appears preternaturally fast. 4.3 Strategic application, timing the reach, the step, and the shot. Beyond the general principle of action-reaction, timing can be applied to specific observable cues in an opponent's movement. Timing the reach, many wrestlers develop rhythmic patterns in their hand fighting, often reaching for a tie-up in a predictable sequence. By carefully observing an opponent during the initial feeling-out process, a wrestler can identify this pattern, e.g. a shift to the left, a shift to the left, a shift to the right, followed by a reach with the lead hand. Once this pattern is recognized, the attacker can time their level change and shot to coincide with the exact moment the opponent's hand comes up to engage, a moment when their lead leg is momentarily unprocessed. A wrestler can identify this pattern, e.g. a shift to the left, a shift to the left, a shift to the right. Timing the step. A wrestler is at their most vulnerable when their weight is being transferred from one foot to the other. When circling, an opponent must constantly step to maintain a square defensive position. A powerful timing strategy is to initiate a shot not when the opponent is stationary, but at the moment one of their feet is in the air or just before it lands. 37. Attacking the planted leg at this moment catches them when they are effectively on one foot, with their base of support dramatically reduced and their ability to sprawl severely compromised. These specific applications underscore the critical nature of the window of opportunity. 41. Even the most technically perfect shot in the world will be easily defended if it is executed at the wrong time. If the window has already closed, the opponent will have re-established their base, lowered their level, and prepared their hands to defend. Thus, the study and practice of timing is as essential to a wrestler's development as the mechanics of the moves themselves. It is the key that unlocks the full potential of their technical arsenal. Section 5. Fatigue, the physiological and psychological battlefield. In the crucible of a wrestling match, fatigue is the great equalizer. It is an unavoidable physiological state that systematically degrades physical and cognitive performance, acting as a solvent that can dissolve even the most refined technique. For the elite wrestler, fatigue is not simply an obstacle to be endured, it is a fundamental component of the strategic landscape. It is a condition to be managed within oneself through superior conditioning and a weapon to be inflicted upon an opponent through relentless pressure and tactical attrition. A comprehensive understanding of the science of fatigue, its physiological mechanisms, its biomechanical consequences, is therefore indispensable for achieving dominance in the later periods of a grueling contest. 5.1. The physiology of fatigue, energy systems, and metabolic byproducts. Muscle fatigue is scientifically defined as the decline in the ability of a muscle to generate force. This decline is not a single event, but the result of a complex interplay of physiological factors. Wrestling, characterized by repeated high-intensity bursts of explosive effort, places a heavy demand on the anaerobic energy system. 4.3. This system provides rapid energy through the breakdown of glycogen without the use of oxygen. However, this process is finite and leads to several fatigue-inducing consequences. First, the immediate energy currency of the muscle, adenosine triphosphate, ATP, becomes depleted during prolonged or intense exertion, reducing the muscle's capacity for contraction. 4.2. Second, the anaerobic metabolism produces byproducts, most notably lactic acid, which dissociates into lactate and hydrogen ions. The accumulation of these metabolic byproducts within the muscle tissue can interfere with enzymatic processes and calcium binding, impairing the muscle's ability to contract effectively. 4.2. Strenuous exercise leads to the loss of fluids and electrolytes through sweat. Electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and calcium are crucial for nerve transmission and muscle contraction, and an imbalance can significantly disrupt muscle function. 4.2. Finally, fatigue also has a central nervous system component. Central fatigue occurs when the brain, as a protective mechanism, reduces the neural output signals sent to the working muscles, effectively putting a governor on performance to prevent injury or systemic collapse. 42. While wrestling is primarily anaerobic, the aerobic energy system plays a vital role in recovery between these intense flurries and in sustaining effort over the full 6 minutes of a match. Superior aerobic conditioning allows a wrestler to clear metabolic byproducts more efficiently and replenish energy stores more quickly, thus staving off the debilitating effects of fatigue for longer. 44. 5.2. The biomechanical impact, how fatigue degrades performance. The physiological onset of fatigue has direct and devastating consequences on a wrestler's biomechanical efficiency and technical execution. As fatigue sets in, a cascade of performance degradation occurs. The most noticeable effect is a compromise in technique. Movements become sloppy, body positioning becomes poor, and the intricate motor patterns required for complex moves begin to break down. 44. This erosion of skill makes a wrestler increasingly vulnerable to an opponent's attacks. Scientific research has quantified these effects, demonstrating that fatigue significantly deteriorates balance and extends reaction time. 45. A fatigued wrestler has greater postural sway and is slower to respond to external stimuli. This is a critical handicap in a sport where stability and split-second decisions are paramount. An opponent who is tired is easier to off-balance, i.e., more susceptible to kuzushi, because their stabilizing muscles are less effective and their neuromuscular coordination is impaired. Their reactions to feints and setups are slower, and their ability to execute a powerful, coordinated defense like a sprawl is diminished. In essence, fatigue acts as a technique solvent. It takes a highly skilled, technically proficient opponent and, over the course of the match, systematically deskills them, reducing them to a less coordinated, slower, and more predictable version of themselves. This is why a wrestler with superior conditioning can often defeat a more technically gifted but less conditioned opponent. They use their endurance as a weapon to erode the opponent's technical foundation until it collapses. 5.3. Weaponizing conditioning, strategies for fatiguing an opponent. Recognizing that fatigue degrades performance, the strategic imperative becomes clear. Impose as much physical and mental stress on the opponent as possible to accelerate their rate of fatigue while managing one's own energy expenditure. This is the art of weaponizing conditioning. The most effective method for achieving this is the application of constant pressure. This involves forcing the opponent to be in a constant state of reaction, never allowing them a moment to rest and recover. 46. Chain wrestling is a primary tool for applying this pressure. By seamlessly transitioning from one attack to the next when the initial attempt is defended, the attacker keeps the opponent on the defensive, forcing them into scrambles and reactive movements that are neurologically and physically more taxing than initiating an attack point 48. This creates an asymmetrical energy cost. The defender must expend more energy to panic catch and respond than the attacker expends in their fluid proactive offense. 46. Another core tactic is making the opponent carry your weight. This is a form of pressure that goes beyond technique. By being heavy on the head in a collar tie, executing heavy sprawls that drive one's hips and body weight down onto the opponent's upper back, and maintaining a grinding, pressure-heavy ride from the top position, a wrestler forces the opponent's muscles to constantly work against an external load point 47. Finally, there is a crucial psychological dimension to the battle of fatigue. A key tenet of wrestling strategy is to never show your opponent that you are tired. Fort 5-1. If a wrestler can maintain a high pace and an offensive mindset even when they are exhausted, it can have a demoralizing effect on an opponent who is also suffering. When one wrestler feels the other begin to break, it can trigger a surge of adrenaline and renewed energy. 55. This mental toughness, the ability to function effectively while tired, is not an innate quality but a trained skill. It is forged in the practice room by intentionally pushing to the point of exhaustion every single day, thereby teaching the body and mind to perform under the extreme duress that is inevitable in the third period of a tough Muay Fight 55. This mental tough Muay Fight 55. Section 6. Stance and defense. The foundation of all action. In wrestling, every offensive attack and defensive reaction originates from a single fundamental position, the stance. It is the platform upon which the entire superstructure of a wrestler's technique is built. A strong, mobile, and biomechanically sound stance is not a passive waiting position. It is a dynamic state of readiness, a coiled spring prepared to explode into a shot, absorb an opponent's attack, or create a dominant angle. It is the physical embodiment of a wrestler's readiness to engage. This section will analyze the biomechanical principles that underpin an effective stance, explore the strategic applications of different stance types, and detail the layered high 6-to-1 biomechanics of the wrestling stance, center of gravity, and base of support. The effectiveness of a wrestling stance is governed by two core principles of biomechanics, the center of gravity, COG, and the base of support, BOGOG, and THOG is the theoretical point where the entire mass of the body may be considered to be concentrated. 5-8. The BOS is the area beneath an object or person that includes every point of contact with the supporting surface. The fundamental rule of stability states that an object is more stable when its GOG is lower and when its BOS is wider. A proper wrestling stance is designed to optimize these two variables for the unique demands of the sport. The wrestler bends at the knees and hinges at the waist, a posture that significantly lowers their COG, bringing it closer to the mat and thus increasing their stability. 0.59. This low level makes it physically more difficult for an opponent to get underneath the wrestler's COG to execute a lift or take down. 0.6e simultaneously. The feet are positioned wider than shoulder width, creating a broad BOS that provides stability in multiple directions. A critical, often repeated coaching point is the biomechanical rule, where the head goes, the hips follow. 29. This is a practical reminder of the interconnectedness of the body segments. If a wrestler allows their head to drop, their hips will inevitably rise, which in turn raises their COG and compromises their stance, making them vulnerable. Therefore, maintaining an upright head position with the eyes looking forward is essential for keeping the hips, and thus the COG low and stable. 0.59. This stable, lowered platform is not only defensive, it is also the ideal position from which to generate explosive power. The bent knees and hinged waist place the powerful muscles of the legs and hips, the glutes, quadriceps, and hamstrings in a preloaded state, ready to fire explosively for a takedown attempt. The stand. 6.2. The strategic dichotomy, square versus staggered stances. Within the general framework of a low athletic stance, wrestlers primarily utilize two variations, the staggered stance and the square stance. The choice between them is a strategic decision based on the situation and the desired outcome, as each offers distinct biomechanical advantages and disadvantages. 6.6. Forward, 1 foot forward of the other, is the predominant stance in folk style and freestyle wrestling. 24. Its primary advantage is superior mobility along the sagittal plane, forward and backward. The rear leg is positioned perfectly to generate explosive forward propulsion for a shot, while the lead leg allows for rapid backward movement to initiate a sprawl. 24. This stance provides a long, stable BOS from front to back, making it difficult for an opponent to push the wrestler over backward or pull them forward. While it is generally considered the more offensive stance, its main vulnerability is the exposure of the lead leg to attack. 24. The square stance, where the feet are positioned on the same horizontal plane, offers a different set of advantages. It creates a very wide BOS from side to side, providing excellent lateral stability and mobility. 24. This makes it a strong defensive position against attacks from the side. In Greco-Roman wrestling, where attacks below the waist are illegal, the square stance is often used to generate powerful upward pressure to disrupt an opponent's COG and set up those. 0.57. However, its primary weakness is its instability along the sagittal plane. A wrestler in a square stance is more susceptible to being pushed directly backward or pulled forward off balance. 24. In practice, elite wrestlers do not rigidly adhere to one stance. They transition fluidly between staggered and square positions throughout a match, adapting their base to the tactical situation at hand. 60. A wrestler might use a staggered stance to set up a leg attack, transition to a square stance to defend an opponent's throw attempt. 2-4 in practice. Elite wrestlers do not rigidly adhere to one stance. 6.3. The first lines of defense: head, hands, and hips. A sound defense in wrestling is not a single action, but a layered, hierarchical system designed to repel attacks at the earliest possible stage. This system can be conceptualized as a funnel, with the outer layers designed to keep the opponent at a distance and the inner layers providing the final, most powerful line of resistance. This hierarchy is often referred to as the 3 H's of defense: head, hands, and hips. The head is the absolute first line of defense. 29. Proper head position, typically with the forehead pressed into the opponent's temple, neck, or chest. A wrestler can create a physical barrier that prevents the opponent from penetrating to their legs or body. 29. Good head position allows a wrestler to steer their opponent, disrupt their posture, and 2. Hands. If an opponent manages to get past the head position, the hands become the second line of defense. 6e. The hands are used for active hand fighting, controlling the opponent's wrists, clearing their ties, and blocking their shots. A down block, where the wrestler drops their level and uses their hands and forearms to block an incoming shot, is a critical skill in this layer of defense. 3. Hips. If an opponent successfully bypasses both the head and the hands and secures a grip on the legs, the hips become the final and most powerful line of defense. 6-1. The primary defensive maneuver of the hips is the sprawl. This is an explosive, athletic movement where the wrestler drives their legs back as far as possible and forcefully drives their hips down onto the opponent's head and upper back. 6-2. The goal of a heavy sprawl is to use the wrestler's full body weight to flatten the opponent onto the mat, breaking their grip on the legs and destroying their posture. 6-2. A successful sprawl not only neutralizes the immediate threat of a takedown, but often creates an immediate offensive opportunity, allowing the defender to spin behind the flattened opponent to score a takedown of their own. This defensive funnel system, head, hands, hips, provides a clear, logical framework for managing threats, ensuring that an opponent's attack is spot simple stamina and weighted try to the takedown, but often creates an immediate offensive opportunity. Section 7. Tie-ups, the science of control and setups. Between the foundational stability of the stance and the explosive execution of a takedown lies the crucial domain of the tie-up. This is the realm of hand fighting, the constant, probing battle for control that dictates the flow of a match from the neutral position. A tie-up is far more than just making contact with an opponent. It is the process of establishing a dominant physical connection that allows a wrestler to control their opponent's motion, create off-balancing opportunities, kuzushi, and manufacture the angles necessary for high-percentage attacks. 0.63. Mastering the science of tie-ups is to master the bridge between position and attack, transforming a static standoff into a dynamic series of offensive opportunity. 7.1. The hand fighting system, establishing dominant control. An effective takedown is almost never achieved without first winning the hand fighting exchange. The tie-up is the setup that makes the takedown possible. 6-7. Therefore, a wrestler's approach to the neutral position must be systematic, with the clear objective of achieving a dominant tie. This system begins with distance management. Reaching out carelessly from too far away exposes a wrestler's arms to drags and counterattacks. 6-8. Elite wrestlers like Jaden Cox initiate contact by posting a hand on the opponent's head, a move that serves both to gauge the distance and to elicit a predictable reaction, the opponent peeling the hand off, which can then be used to transition into a more dominant position like inside counterattacks. This process of probing and reacting reveals that tie-ups function as a sophisticated diagnostic tool. A wrestler applies a specific stimulus, a post, a collar tie, an underhook, to diagnose the opponent's defensive habits and preferences. The opponent's reaction to that stimulus provides the critical information needed to select the next most effective attack. This frames hand fighting not as a brute struggle for grips, but as an intelligent, probing conversation where one wrestler asks questions with their ties, and the opponent answers with their ties, and the opponent answers with their reactions. A key principle within this system, as articulated by Coach Mike Powell, is to break the takedown process into 3 phases: setup, attack, and finish, with the heaviest emphasis placed on the setup, the hand fighting, and tie-up. 26. This approach involves using heavy hands to constantly pull and pressure the opponent's head and neck, a tactic designed to wear them down physically and create openings through attrition. 26. The goal is to control the engagement on your own terms, never allowing the opponent to establish their preferred tie. 26. 687.2. Anatomy of key tie-ups, collar tie, inside control, underhook, and Russian 2-on-1. While there are countless variations of grips and ties, several dominant positions form the core of most hand fighting systems. Each offers a unique set of controls and offensive pathways. Collar tie. This involves placing one hand on the back of the opponent's neck. 65. It is one of the most common ties in wrestling and provides excellent control over the opponent's head and posture. A strong collar tie is a primary tool for generating kuzushi via a hard snap-down, and for steering the opponent around the mat to create angles .67. However, if the opponent achieves a similar tie, it can result in a neutral 50-50 position with no clear advantage 25. Inside control, in this position, both of the wrestler's arms are inside the opponent's arms, typically with the hands controlling the opponent's biceps or triceps 25. This is a powerful and versatile position for setting up leg attacks. From inside control, a wrestler can effectively push and pull the opponent, and more importantly, clear the opponent's arms out of the way to create open lanes for single leg, double leg, and high crotch shots 25 underhook. Underhook. An underhook is achieved by placing one arm under the opponent's arm and securing a grip high on their shoulder or back. It is widely considered one of the most aggressive and dominant ties in wrestling. .67. A deep underhook allows a wrestler to lift and move their opponent, create a powerful angle of attack on the same side, and expose the opponent's entire body to a vast array of attacks, including single legs, knee picks, throws, and trips. The opponent is forced into a defensive posture, constantly worried about the multiple threats the underhook presents. Russian 2-on-1, also known as a 2-on-1, this tie involves using both hands to control one of the opponents. This tie involves using both hands to control one of the opponent's arms. This creates a massive leverage and control 25. The opponent is forced into a defensive posture. The opponent's controlled arm is effectively neutralized, and they are pulled into a position where they cannot face the attacker squarely, creating a severe angle 25. From the Russian 2-on-1, the attacker has numerous offensive options, including single legs, ankle picks, and throws, while the opponent's offensive capabilities are almost completely shut down 25. This analysis suggests a clear hierarchy of control in tie-ups. A wrestler's strategy should be to climb the ladder of control. The engagement may start with preliminary contact like posting, then progress to establishing a solid control position like a collar tie or inside control. From there, the constant goal should be to upgrade to a truly dominant, match-altering tie like a deep underhook or a Russian 2-on-1, from which score 7.3. From tie to takedown, using control to create dominant angles and openings. A dominant tie-up is not the end goal, it is the means to an end. The purpose of achieving a position like an underhook or inside control is to create the necessary conditions for a successful takedown. This is accomplished in two primary ways, generating kuzushi and creating angles. First, the tie is used to off-balance the opponent. The grips provided by a collar tie, inside control, or underhook give the wrestler the leverage to push, pull, circle, and snap their opponent, constantly disrupting their base and breaking their posture. 25. An opponent who is constantly being moved and forced to adjust their footing is far more vulnerable than one who is stationary and set in their stance. Second, the tie is used to create a dominant angle of attack. By using an underhook to circle, for example, a wrestler can force the opponent to turn, exposing their lead leg for a single leg attack .69. The Russian 2-on-1, by its very nature, pulls the opponent into a severe angle, making their far leg an easy target. 25. The tie-up is the tool that allows the wrestler to solve the geometric problem of the opponent's defense, moving them out of their strong head-on position and into a compromised angle where their legs are accessible and their defenses are misaligned. This systematic process, establishing a dominant tie, using it to create kuzushi and an angle, and then executing the takedown. 25. The tie-up is the tool that allows the wrestler to solve the geometric problem of the opponent-to-tourney fighting system. Section 8. Consistency and Practice, Forging Elite Performance. The preceding 7 principles, mechanical advantage, dominant angle, off-balancing, timing, fatigue, stance, and tie-ups, represent the scientific and strategic building blocks of wrestling. However, knowledge of these principles in isolation is insufficient for success. The final, and perhaps most crucial, principle is the mechanism through which these disparate elements are integrated into a single, cohesive, and automatic system of performance, consistency, and practice. It is through the crucible of disciplined daily training that theoretical knowledge is transformed into instinctive physical intelligence. This section will analyze the psychological and pedagogical foundations of elite performance, culminating in a case study of Dan Gable, a figure whose career embodies the philosophy of 8.1. The psychology of consistency. Developing a champion's mindset. Consistency, in the context of elite athletics, is the unwavering commitment to prioritizing and executing a planned course of action on a daily basis. 71. It is the discipline to maintain a high level of expectation and performance, minimizing the peaks and valleys that characterize the efforts of the less dedicated. 71. For a wrestler, this means that showing up, trying hard, and embracing the grind of daily practice is more important than any other singular goal. 7. This level of dedication is not born from fleeting motivation, but from a deeply ingrained mindset. A consistent performance on the mat is the direct result of consistent thoughts, consistent emotions, and consistent behaviors in all aspects of life. 3. This requires a structured approach. Elite performers often have a written plan that encompasses not only their physical training, but also their nutrition and, critically, their mindset. 71. The act of codifying these goals and processes increases compliance and reinforces the discipline necessary for daily execution. The driving force behind this entire structure is the wrestler's WHY, the deep, intrinsic reason they had set their goals. This purpose serves as the fuel that powers the thousands of decisions and actions required to remain consistent. 8.2 The science of skill acquisition, deliberate practice, and muscle memory. The primary goal of practice is the acquisition of technique. Athleticism, while beneficial, is meaningless without the technical skill to apply it effectively. Therefore, sport-specific practice must always be the highest priority, with all other forms of training, such as strength and conditioning, structured to support it. 0.74. The process through which practice translates into performance is the development of muscle memory through deliberate repetition. The purpose of drilling techniques over and over is to move the execution of complex motor skills from the conscious to the subconscious mind. This makes the movements automatic, allowing a wrestler to react instantly and correctly under the high-pressure, chaotic environment of a live match without having to stop and think. 0.75. This process begins with mastering the fundamentals. A wrestler must perfect their stance, basic movements, and simple takedowns before attempting more complex or flashy moves. 0.75. However, not all practice is created equal. Elite skill acquisition comes from smart training, not just hard training. This involves practicing with purpose and precision, often under the guidance of a knowledgeable coach who can provide targeted feedback. 0.75. It also means using drills that effectively simulate the demands of a real match, developing not only physical execution but also strategic decision making. 0.75. This is the principle of transfer of training hardship. The philosophy shared by many elite coaches and athletes is to make the practice environment significantly harder than the competition itself. 0.54. By becoming accustomed to functioning under extreme levels of fatigue and pressure in the training room, the wrestler becomes psychologically and physiologically inoculate the stress of a 6-minute match. 8.3 Case Study. The Dan Gable Philosophy of Relentless Preparation. Perhaps no figure in American wrestling better personifies the ethos of consistency and hard practice than Dan Gable. His legendary work ethic and coaching philosophy were forged in the aftermath of a single devastating loss in the 1970 NCAA Finals, his only defeat in his entire high school and collegiate career. After that match, Gable vowed he wouldn't ever let anyone destroy him again and committed to working so hard every day that he would become the toughest man in the world. C6. Gable's approach to practice was famously brutal. His goal was to end every session physically exhausted, viewing anything less as a sign that he had not pushed himself hard enough. 0.76. This Iowa style of training, characterized by borderline insane conditioning sessions designed to break athletes mentally and physically, came to dominate the American wrestling landscape. 777 But Gable's preparation was also holistic and intelligent. He was meticulous about his sleep, nutrition, and fitness. His mental training was equally relentless. He would visualize not only his own performance but also his opponent's training sessions, ensuring in his mind that he was always outworking them. 776 This unwavering consistency, fueled by the memory of his one loss. While Gable's methods have been incredibly influential, the philosophy of practice continues to evolve. Many modern programs, influenced by figures like Cael Sanderson, now place a greater emphasis on training smarter, in addition to training harder. This involves incorporating more time for technical drilling, play wrestling, to develop fluidity, and more strategic rest and recovery to prevent burnout and injury, which were common under the older, more attrition-based models. 7.7 Ultimately, consistency and practice serve as the great integrator. The 7 preceding principles are not practiced in isolation. It is through thousands of hours of consistent, deliberate practice that a wrestler learns to fuse them into a single, fluid system. In a live drill, a wrestler starts from their stance, engages in tie-ups to create off-balancing kuzushi, which opens up a dominant angle. With precise timing, they execute a takedown that utilizes their body's mechanical advantage. This entire sequence is performed at a high pace designed to induce fatigue in their partner. Consistency is the process that transforms the conscious, step-by-step application of these 8 principles into the subconscious, instinctive, and seamless action that utilizes their body's mechanical advantage. Conclusion. The synthesis of principles in elite wrestling. The analysis of wrestling through the discrete lenses of mechanical advantage, dominant angle, off-balancing, timing, fatigue, stance and defense, tie-ups, and consistency in practice reveals the scientific underpinnings of the sport. Yet, the true mastery of wrestling does not lie in the isolated proficiency of any single principle, but in their seamless and synergistic synthesis. Elite performance is an emergent property of the dynamic interplay between these 8 fundamental elements, a continuous flow of action and reaction governed by the laws of physics and the limits of human physiology. To illustrate this synthesis, consider a hypothetical exchange in a high-level match. The bout begins with both wrestlers establishing a solid stance, each a stable weapons platform built on a low center of gravity and a wide base of support. From this foundation, they engage in the probing battle of tie-ups. One wrestler, Wrestler A, establishes inside control, a dominant position from which to launch an offense. This is not a static hold, but a tool. Wrestler A uses the tie to apply constant, grinding pressure, forcing Wrestler B to carry their weight, the first step in the strategic application of fatigue. Using the inside tie, Wrestler A executes a hard snap down. This is a direct application of off-balancing kuzushi, breaking wrestler B's posture and forcing an instinctual reaction to fight up and regain their stance. This reaction is the key. With precise timing, wrestler A anticipates this upward movement, releases the head, and changes levels, shooting a double-leg takedown at the exact moment wrestler B's weight is shifting upward, compromising their ability to sprawl. The shot itself is an exhibition of mechanical advantage. Wrestler A's body acts as a system of levers, driving through wrestler B's hips, the fulcrum to lift and control their entire body mass with biomechanical efficiency. This entire sequence was made possible by wrestler A's ability to create a dominant angle by using the initial tie-up to move wrestler B out of their square defensive position. This entire, complex, multi-layered strategy, executed in a matter of seconds under extreme physical duress, is not the product of chance. It is the result of thousands of hours of consistency and practice, where these individual principles were drilled until they fused into a single, subconscious, and instinctive response. This report has deconstructed the art of wrestling into its scientific components, demonstrating that every movement, every position, and every strategy has a basis in the principles of biomechanics, physics, and physiology. For the advanced student of the sport, this framework provides a powerful tool for analysis, diagnosis, and improvement. By understanding not just what works, but why it works, athletes and coaches can move beyond mere imitation and toward true innovation. They can diagnose technical flaws not as isolated mistakes, but as breakdowns in a specific underlying principle. A failure to achieve kuzushi, improper timing, or a disadvantageous angle. Ultimately, the path to excellence in this demanding sport is paved with a deep and nuanced understanding of this interconnected system of principles, the scientific foundation upon which all champions are built.